This video is for teachers who are looking for an overview and some ideas for modifications on day 14 of Unit 2 in the Passport to Social Studies curriculum. The focus question of this lesson is, how did the agency of enslaved African Americans help to cause the Civil War, with the learning target of students being able to identify and explain the causal relationship between two sources related to abolition and Nat Turner's rebellion. As might be the case with several lessons in this unit, students may find the content distressing or upsetting. However, it is still important that we study these events and critically read the related sources. In this Note to Teacher slide, links are shared to resources from Facing History and ourselves, and that do offer strategies and ideas on how to address this. One last thing to consider is this reminder that we still use our virtual classroom as a space for students to express their discomfort and feelings of anger or distress that may emerge from learning about these topics in history. The lesson starts with a Framing the Learning slide that summarizes the lesson's content, but also previews for the students the activities that they will be completing. The students start by analyzing data presented in 2 tables, 1 map, and an image, and they use all of those sources to create a historical context for Nat Turner's rebellion. Then they are going to assess the reliability of and source the text, The Confessions of Nat Turner, and they will do that by using a sourcing and evaluating reliability tool, which is actually embedded into these slides here. And lastly, they are then going to determine the causal relationship between that source and the subsequent laws that were passed by the Virginia State Legislature. For all the sources that the students will use to create that historical context, they will be doing a See, Connect, and Infer activity for each. And this is going to be useful for several reasons. First, if you want to use it to establish a baseline for your students' skills, you can. For instance, you can use it to gauge how well your students read tables, like this one, which might not be a very common occurrence in a history class. Second, you can use it to assess some of their higher level skills, such as also making connections to outside ideas, as well as inferencing. These last two could provide insight into how students are applying that big idea or the theme of the source that they are presently analyzing. Lastly, it is one of those instructional routines that increases students' accessibility to a source. Since there is no definitive answer for connecting and inferencing, the students can think critically at their own level and just be in the moment of analyzing the source. Since they will be doing this protocol in just a moment with an image that is pivotal to this lesson, you may decide to approach one of the tables as a guided practice or as a model. You might even decide to do one of the table ones as an I do, the one with the map as a we do, and the one with the image of Am I Not a Man and a Brother as a you do. Let me go back one slide just for a second. So regardless of how you structure these activities, they should provide the students with enough insight to respond to this question, as it requires students to utilize their analytical skills as well as considering the content they just covered. It is also a natural point for a quick CFU if you think one is needed. Also, since there are several ways the students may interpret these sources, there will also likely be several trends or patterns they recognize, so providing them space to share and react to the findings of their peers could also be useful. I would consider using an online note-sharing space or discussion board to facilitate this. Additionally, this will also identify to you students who might need reteaching or support heading into the next section. From here, the students will now apply the See, Connect, Infer protocol to the image Am I Not a Man and Brother, the head note for which you can see right here. Again, since this image is an integral component of the lesson, a share out or a check for understanding should follow, especially if this was the first time the students did it on their own. And you can see some questions that might achieve that right here on the next slide. Before moving on to the next part of this lesson though, ensure your students have a baseline understanding of what this image is, as well as a reasonable idea of the artist's purpose and intent. Without directly providing the definition of what abolition is, or what the Society of the Abolition of Slavery in England was, facilitate a discussion as needed to ensure that the students are aware of this part of the head note, because it is going to be relevant in the upcoming activity. The next part of the lesson requires groups of students to collaborate on how they will define abolition and to discuss how the image Am I Not a Man and Brother depicts slavery using moral suasion. To define abolition, students will likely rely on prior knowledge from other history classes as well as outside information, in addition to considering the purpose of the image as the seal of the Society of the Abolition of Slavery in England, which we just discussed. For the second part of this activity, the student groups are also provided with this definition of moral suasion. However, this definition may not be enough, and the students may benefit from further elaboration or maybe even an example. To elaborate and provide clarity, you might explain the relationship between suasion and persuasion. Tell students that suasion can be viewed as the action, the words used to convince somebody by appealing to their conscience. Persuasion can be seen as the effect. If a person is persuaded, that means the suasion worked. If you think an example would be beneficial, you can find numerous ones from the works of Dr. King or from even some current places such as the environmental movement. When the students are finished, you can check their understanding by facilitating a discussion about either or both of these prompts. The lesson then segues to the independent work portion, where the students will explain the causal relationship between two primary sources. First, they will read the Confessions of Nat Turner and source and assess its reliability using the sourcing and evaluating reliability tool, which is embedded into these slides. Before beginning this, though, verbally remind the students of the importance of reading a source's headnote and sourcing information, as this will likely not only put the document in context, but also provide information they will want to know as they consider the author's perspective, purpose, bias, and audience. There is a CFU question that follows, which you can see here, and there is a second question, which is really to set up the next text by having the students anticipate how the state of Virginia is going to react to Nat Turner's rebellion. But before they actually read acts passed by the Virginia legislature, take a few moments to go and preview these questions with the students. The first one is pretty straightforward. The second one connects back to their discussion of moral suasion. And if this was a new phrase to the students, it may be beneficial for them to get a brief reminder of what it is so they know what to look for as they're contemplating evidence that acts of moral suasion influenced or caused the passage of the laws that they are reading. The third and fourth questions focus on the two opposing sides of human agency. The first being that of Nat Turner, his followers, and the growing abolition movement. The second being the human agency demonstrated by the legislatures of the state of Virginia. In each of these next 4 slides are spaces for students to independently record their responses. As the last 3 are more open to interpretation and time permits, you might want to provide the students with a space to share and react to the thoughts of their peers. Specifically, with this one, the second one, this is a yes or no question, and it might be advantageous to poll the class and then make the results public, which might serve as a discussion starting point. Then, ask students to verbally or type into the chat, provide their rationales. The wrap-up question asks students to write a paragraph explaining the causal relationship between these two documents, along with supporting evidence from at least one of the texts. To support them with this, you could provide them access to the language of causation tool. Also, you might consider providing them with a word bank of terms that they've studied recently that would strengthen their writing, such as trigger, long-term causes, or short-term causes. Or you might even include necessary, sufficient, or relative causes. I think that having students consider whether Nat Turner's rebellion was a necessary or sufficient cause might lend itself to students writing some pretty thoughtful and analytical paragraphs. Additionally, this would also reinforce their causation analysis skills, which are such a big part of this unit. And lastly, the lesson concludes with this check for understanding, which serves 2 roles. First, it connects earlier into the lesson when they were looking at human agency and the acts passed by the Virginia legislature. And second, it prepares the students for the summative assessment. And you can inform them that they may want to bookmark their response here so they can easily refer back to it as they prepare for that summative.